Lord Jesus, we thank you so much for your kindness to us. That your mercies and your goodness are renewed every morning. And pray that you open our eyes to see your goodness in our lives, day after day. Will you carry us and strengthen us and carry our burdens. Praise you, Jesus. Amen. So this is part 2, following on from the talk about Sabbath rest. Sabbath rest, not so much in the sense of let's have a religious day, but we were thinking about the difference between having a day off and a day of rest. And there is a difference between the way we as culture nowadays try to enjoy ourselves on a day off and a behavior that is genuinely restful and restoring for us as people. And we were talking last time about the externals of that. What are the externals of creating rest for myself? And without going through everything that I said then, I think there's something very individual about it, that what's restful for person A is not necessarily restful for person B. So you have to find your own route in what's restful within the framework that God has given. And it's good to listen to the things that God has said, from ancient words that go well beyond our culture and our time, to allow ourselves to rethink our way of resting and being restored. And then at the end of that talk I said, well, I think I need to do another talk to go with it that talks more about the inner dimensions of rest, because you might achieve external rest, but as soon as you do that, everything starts kicking off on the inside and it's actually not restful at all. So this is the attempt at that second part. So it comes under the heading of rest for your soul. And I'll read 2 scriptures to start with. One is in Exodus chapter 33. From verse 12, Moses said to the Lord, "You've been telling me, lead these people, but you've not let me know whom you will send with me. You've said, I know you by name, and you have found favor with me. If you're pleased with me, teach me your ways, so I may know you and continue to find favor with you. Remember that this nation is your people." The Lord replied, "My presence will go with you, and I will give you rest." And then there is a companion verse to that in the New Testament. Where Jesus says, "All things have been committed to me by my Father. No one knows the Son except the Father, and no one knows the Father except the Son, and those to whom the Son chooses to reveal him. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." So both promises are promises of rest, but in the context of the Old Testament, the focus of the rest is, I think, slightly more on the external, that they're coming from a background of slavery. They're fleeing that environment to enter a new environment, their land of promise. And in that context, God says to them, keep on going. And in the land that you're about to enter, I will give you rest. The rest, in that sense, meaning you will no longer be slaves. You won't have to work day in, day out for these cruel, unkind masters. You will be able to organize your own timetable. You'll be able to grow fruit and eat it yourself. You don't have to slave away for others I will give you rest from all that. And the promise is extended to say, I will give you rest in the sense of you will not be bothered by enemies. You will be able to enjoy the land and the life I'm giving you. I'm giving you the absence of strife. That's restful, isn't it? Especially when you come from a context where you've had lots of strife and lots of oppression and lots of injustice. To hear there's a place where you will have rest from that is a huge promise. But when Jesus speaks about it, I think he takes it a step further, not just to promise a land of rest and rest from your enemies, but he says you will find rest for your souls. And to me that points to another dimension, that in many ways as a society now, we achieve a lot of that first rest. We're not continually bothered by enemies. We are allowed to work and enjoy the fruit of our labors, minus taxes. Yeah. But the sort of the external is achieved in quite a large portion, much more so when you hold that in comparison to being a slave in Egypt. We've got it good. Yeah? There's a lot of rest in our life that God has given us. But when you have that rest, I think it also allows you the leisure to suddenly read what's going on your inside. And you find, well, but it's not all rest inside. Most of you have probably seen the picture of these blob trees. You know what I mean? So blob trees, it's just like a diagram of a big tree. And then you get these cartoon characters sitting on branches of this tree all over. And it's a tool that's used in mentoring and in getting people to talk about their own emotions, because there will be somebody on a branch who's sawing off his own branch. And there'll be somebody who's sitting on a branch together with somebody else in a loving embrace. And there's somebody else who's looking down the branch thinking, I'm going to jump. And somebody else who's looking seriously upset. And somebody else who's shooting at somebody else on another branch. And you say, so identify where you're at. And you look at all these options, and after a while think like, I think I'm like him. Yeah? I'm about to jump. Or no, I'm actually like that one who's lying in the hammock between the two branches, peaceful and restful. There, see, John's the one. Yeah, see, so there's the hanging on one. There's the one who's giving his mate a helping hand. He looks slightly grumpy to me, whereas he's having adventure time. He's not too happy about those two. He's probably not too happy about him. Yeah. So it just shows sort of the scope of internal life in us. And I think it's a poem by Ezra Pound that says, "Sitting by a lamp, dear Warlock Williams, does not always produce peace." And that is the core, isn't it? That you can put yourself in a place of external rest, but rather than finding rest internally at that point, it might actually do the opposite, that it stirs up all these corners in you that in the busyness of life are behind drawn curtains. So some people learn from that and say, I'm never going to go there. I will just not allow myself that time of rest, because it just makes me think things that I don't want to think about. Yeah. I'll just keep busy. I'll be happier. But God's commandment to honor the Sabbath day and to keep it holy and to do no work on that day actually, I think, points in a different direction. To say to us, don't keep yourself so busy that never allow these things to become a consciousness in you. Do create an external rest for yourself, because even if it brings up these issues, it's good for you. So, and the core of God's promise, both to Moses and through Jesus, is, I will give you rest. And Jesus saying very definitely as well, I will give you rest for your soul. Or a little while before he leaves his disciples behind, he says, my peace I leave with you. So I think it is one of God's core promises to promise that we can have internal rest. But not everybody has got it. So I was sitting there thinking, okay, I'm going to do a sermon on how to find rest. 5 easy points, how to find rest for your soul. No? And I got my 5 points quite easy, and then I sat down with my 5 points and thought about them for a moment. And then I realized that none of those 5 points were easy. Yeah. Not a single one of them was easy, actually. Yeah, they were good points, and I like them, but actually they're not easy. Not at all. So I thought, no, this is going to end up in something a bit of a fraud if I do a sermon on 5 easy points to find inner peace, and it's not easy, and I don't know whether I can even do it myself, so this is not going to go well. What shall I do? So what I've ended up with is looking at the life of Joseph. And in some ways Joseph is the opposite of a person who's allowed to live a life in restful peace. But I do think he becomes a peaceful person, and a person who is at rest. So that's what I would like to do. Just let's read together through a bit of Joseph's story and see what we can glean from him about this subject of internal rest. Yeah. So we start in Genesis chapter 37. Verse 2. Joseph, a young man of 17, was tending the flocks with his brothers, the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives. And he brought their father a bad report about them. Now Israel loved Joseph more than any of his other sons, because he had been born to him in his old age. And he made an ornate robe for him. When his brothers saw that their father loved him more than any of them, they hated him and could not speak a kind word to him. It's step one really here, isn't it? It's the enemies of peace rather than the friends of peace in Joseph's life. What's an enemy of peace? Well, for example, just this pettiness in him to go and complain to his father about the brothers. Pettiness in relationship, as sometimes seen on garden allotments. No? There's everybody on their allotment, they could have a lovely happy time, but what happens? They make life a misery for each other by just saying, what are you doing about those weeds? And you came through my garden gate, and you did that. And it's just the sheer sad pettiness of human behavior that can be an astonishing destroyer of inner peace. Yeah? That you can sit there and dwell on that for rather a long time. Yeah, way beyond the amount of time this thing deserves. That's just where Joseph started. Now then his father likes him more than the brothers, gives him a super robe. That's probably an enemy of peace, being promoted beyond what you deserve. But then his brothers just can't stand him anymore and can't say a kind word to him. That doesn't make for inner peace. Tension in your immediate relationships, words that are being spoken, doesn't make for peace. Then a little while later, it says his brothers were jealous of him. Because, why? because he kept having these grand dreams and he couldn't keep his mouth shut. He had to tell them about the grand dreams. And again, it doesn't make for peace. Yeah? Perhaps there's a bit of ambition in Joseph to, hey, I'm better than my brothers. That doesn't make for peace. And the brothers being jealous of him doesn't make for peace. No good news so far. It's still going to take a while for good news. Then he goes out to visit his brothers, and they say, here comes that dreamer, what shall we do? Then we'll see what comes of his dreams. So when Joseph came to his brothers, verse 23 in chapter 37, they stripped him of his robe, the ornate robe he was wearing, and they took him and threw him into the cistern. The cistern was empty, there was no water in it. Verse 28, so when the Midianites merchants came by, his brothers pulled Joseph up out of the cistern and sold him for 20 shekels of silver to the Ishmaelites, who took him to Egypt. Doesn't make for peace. Doesn't make for inner peace. Actually, if you imagine yourself in that kind of situation, that could rob you of your inner peace for a lifetime. Yeah. You know, you've got a family, and you would look at it and say, yes, now with hindsight, I was an annoying twit. I shouldn't have said the thing about the dreams. I shouldn't have gone to my father about that. But on the other hand, they shouldn't have been jealous about the robe. After all, he gave it to me. No, and honestly, okay, no, I wasn't perfect, but I did not deserve to be thrown into a cistern. That was just uncalled for. Yeah, and self-justification is in operation, and we do this so well that we always come out of it looking pretty good. Yeah, Adam and Eve. It was the woman you put with me in the garden. It's got nothing to do with my behavior. Not me. Anyway, what I did is this, no? And what they did is that. And that doesn't make for inner peace, but it can keep you going for a long, long time. And not to make just fun of it, not to be sold by your brothers is betrayal. Yeah, that is just harsh betrayal. And to be really betrayed by someone does not make for inner peace. It does hurt, it does scar, it does create those kind of memories that come back at night. I think nighttime is one of those periods of rest that we haven't got full control over. So suddenly you wake up in the middle of the night and you've got unwanted thoughts. You don't want them, but they're there. And they tend to go back to these kind of things. They sold me. Yeah. For goodness sake, they sold me. They sold me for 20 shekels. I mean, I could have given them 20 shekels. If they'd asked me nicely, I'd given them the robe. Surely I would have done it. No? But they sold me. Brothers, they sold me. Was it necessary? That you hear the enemies of inner peace, isn't it? Then he's sold, he gets to Egypt, Potiphar puts him in charge of the household, he's blessed, all great. Then the woman says, come to bed with me. Can I have a moment's peace? Yeah? I mean, look what I've been through. Yeah, does everything have to be bombarded in my life and shot at? Just when I've scrabbled above ground again? Is it necessary, God? God! This is not fair. Yeah? This is not right. Can't you get this woman to just leave me in peace? You're God Almighty. Yeah? Can we not just fix this? Just give her some really dark sunglasses so she doesn't see me? Or send her on a long holiday? I mean, there are many ways to fix this problem. Just somehow get her to leave me alone. The prayer is not answered. It gets worse. And unjustly accused, he's in a prison that probably didn't meet modern hygienic standards. Yeah. It doesn't make for inner peace. So here's Joseph, basically a fairly nice young man with issues that most other nice young men have. A bit of argy-bargy with brothers, a bit of self-promotion. It's not bad. But he has to go through such extremely difficult things. No, I don't think you want to apply the, well, he sinned and he deserved it. No, it's the judgment of God. It doesn't quite fit the story. He's a fairly ordinary, nice-ish chap who has to go through really, really difficult things that internally have got the potential to take him completely apart and leave him in bits for the rest of his life. Languishing in a prison, feeling utterly rejected, betrayed, sold, mistreated, not valued. There's nothing there, nothing really of positive. I mean, if he went to a seminar now on positive thinking, what would he do? It really struggled to make this story into something that it was a great success. Yeah, brilliant. No, it's going so well. Fantastic. Like, I'm just going to confess 15 times a day now. It's going well. It's going well. It's going well. Yes, it's sure it's going well. I'm sure I don't believe that it's going well. Yeah, the techniques would fail him. But then it says the first bit of really good news here. Chapter 39, verse 20. But while Joseph was there in the prison, the Lord was with him. He showed him kindness and granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden. And then verse 23, second half. Because the Lord was with Joseph and gave him success in whatever he did. And to me it's not so much the success, but it's just the two words, the Lord was with him, he showed him kindness. Now, he's in an environment that is not conducive to kindness. He's got a recent history that's not particularly conducive to make him think about kindness. But somehow the dark is not dark to God. The night shines as the day. God enters the prison, and God entering the prison, being with Joseph, really, really alters something very deeply. God shows him kindness. We're not told how that works, how Joseph quite got there to that point. What's the method? What's the technique? I don't know. I don't see it there. But I do see that he was kind of in an enforced rest. Many of the things that other people could do, he couldn't do because he was in prison. Yeah. And while they made him work there, prison probably also meant a lot of time where you just sit around and there's nothing to do. Yeah, there's an enforced external rest. And I just believe that there is a connection between that external rest and God coming to us. Yeah. That in those places where either we put ourselves into that rest or where God puts us into that rest, God often seems to just come. Don't you think? Hospital, people suddenly through illness and enforced situation, but they find God came to me, or a breakup of family relationship, and suddenly you've got way more time on your own than you ever had, but suddenly God comes to you, or you lose somebody dear to you, and suddenly you have so much more time on your own. But doesn't God come? Doesn't He come into those situations and show kindness? What's the kindness? How does it work? I think again it's so different for each one. Sometimes it's just a chocolate pudding. I think God brings chocolate puddings to those who wait. And it can make you happy. And it can make you feel like that was really kind. Thank you. Yeah? Or you go for a walk and there's just this really lovely, lovely tree. And somehow you think that's the loveliest tree I've seen. It is just so lovely. And if you have that switch inside them to say, thank you God, that was your kindness. Your kindness coming to me in these little unexpected things. And I think somehow God came to Joseph in prison in that way. And the immediate result was that I think some form of inner peace must have entered Joseph, because a few days later he sees the cupbearer and the baker. And this is chapter 40, verse 6. When Joseph came to them the next morning, he saw that they were dejected. So he asked Pharaoh's officials who were in custody with him in his master's house, "Why do you look so sad today?" And that for me is a little indicator of inner peace. Yeah? That when you're in that place where you're just surrounded by the enemies of peace, and they're chewing away at your inside, you're angry, you're blaming others, you're cross, you're pointing the finger, you're self-righteous, you're self-pitying, and all that. But the end result of it is you're so absorbed in yourself, you do not notice whether anybody around you is happy or sad. You're oblivious to it because you're completely involved with yourself. But Joseph is not. And I think that's the fruit of God's kindness. Kindness has come to him and brought a measure of inner peace and restfulness to his soul. And suddenly it's like his eyes open, and in prison he looks and says, "Hey, why are you guys so sad?" Yeah? There's a healing here. There's a healing in him. And the word shalom in the Hebrew context does not just mean the absence of strife, but it actually means a completeness that involves not just the getting rid of the bad, but embracing the good. And so here is a bit of an example of shalom coming to Joseph, because his own troubles are fading into absence, and instead he's able to choose the good, extending himself to others, saying, "What can I do for you? Oh, you've got a dream. Well, I'm good with dreams. Tell me the dream. I'll tell you what it means." But in that, he's not fully out of the woods, I think, because then he's saying to one of them, that just when you get out of here, and you're with Pharaoh, just remember me. Get me out of here. Legitimate. Who wants to stay in prison? Yeah. But he's forgotten. Humanly speaking, that's really bad again. So another rejection added to his other rejections, another reason to be deeply disappointed, another reason to lose peace, another reason to start on the whole cycle again of like, I was kind to him and he couldn't even remember me. And, yeah? A different version of what he's been through with his brothers. But just a disappointment with a person and justifying himself, accusing them, And over that, he would have lost peace. And who of us can understand this? God, it seems to have been God's will to stay another 2 years in prison. Two years in God's very special own Bible school education program, tailor-made for Joseph. But 2 years where surely he had times where he had to battle with these internal things. And that's where I think, just in terms of an instruction on how can we find inner peace, I think perhaps this Joseph story is a more honest story than just the 5 easy steps to inner peace. Because it's not easy for him, and it takes time. And it would have taken some nights where he failed totally. Some days where he failed totally, where he did not achieve inner peace at all, quite the opposite. But eventually, somehow, this worked through his system. And I think he did get to points where he overcame this. He was more restful and peaceful. Perhaps he even got to the point where he was able to say, well, God, if I never get out of this place, that's okay for me now. Perhaps. But the great day comes. He is remembered. He remembers Pharaoh. He is able to interpret Pharaoh's dreams, and Pharaoh takes him out of prison, and he's given a position of responsibility, and he gets married, and there's a lot of change in his externals. But then he says, in chapter 41, verse 50, before the years of famine came, 2 sons were born to Joseph by Asenath, daughter of Potiphera, priest of On. Joseph named his firstborn Manasseh and said, it is because God has made me forget all my trouble and all my father's household. The second son he named Ephraim and said, it is because God has made me fruitful in the land of my suffering. God made me forget. God made me fruitful. And in that I see perhaps prayers we can pray in our journey to inner peace and rest. Prayer number 1 would perhaps be the prayer, let God show me your kindness. Be with me and show me your kindness. No matter what the circumstances, no matter what the past or the future, God, I ask you, be with me and show me your kindness. And then, God, you made Joseph forget. Give me a heavenly dimension of forgetfulness. Yeah? And I think that's not a bad prayer. Some things we want to forget, don't we? Some things are good to forget because they don't add any joy to our lives. If we can forget them in a God-given way, so not psychological repression, put it under the carpet, but God gives us the ability to just forget about it. That's a brilliant thing. God make me fruitful. That's shalom again. It's not just dealing with the negative, but putting something positive in instead that absorbs his attention. He's got 2 sons. EP, boys to play with. There's somebody to focus on. He's not in prison anymore. He's out. He can invest himself in these lives. That's good. And then his brothers come and visit him. They don't recognize him. But it says, verse 8, the next chapter, although Joseph recognized his brothers, they did not recognize him. Then he remembered his dreams about them. Then he remembered his dreams. It's another good prayer, isn't it? It seems like for all these years in prison, the dreams have been forgotten. They were just not present anymore. But there was something about those dreams God had said. They weren't just the fanciful imaginations of an ambitious young man. It was something that God really had said. And God was watching over his word. God was watching over his word to perform it in Joseph's life, through Joseph's life, with a vision of shalom behind it. Not just for Joseph, but for others as well. And then you know the great scene at the very end when Joseph's brothers have been, and he, chapter 45, he makes himself known to his brothers. Verse 3, then Joseph said to his brothers, I am Joseph. Is my father still living? But his brothers were not able to answer him because they were terrified at his presence. Then Joseph said to his brothers, come close to me. When they had done so, he said, I am your brother Joseph, the one you sold into Egypt. And now, do not be distressed and do not be angry with yourself for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. For 2 years now there has been famine in the land, and for the next 5 years there will be no plowing and reaping. But God sent me ahead of you to preserve for you a remnant on earth, and to save your lives by a great deliverance. So it was not you who sent me here, but God. And that's why I think Joseph is such a great example of inner peace. This whole paragraph says to me he found it. Yeah. He found it. He arrived at that place where he really made peace with his past. His brothers hadn't. His brothers were terrified. They have no rest for their souls at that moment. But Joseph has got so much of it that it spills over onto them. What an amazing outcome. Yeah. If it was me to judge, would I say, well, it was worth the time in prison? I don't know. I might not say that. Yeah. Because it's a harsh way of getting to that result. But the result is amazing. You think at all the things that have been thrown at him, for him to come out the other end with an identity, this phrase of I am Joseph, that seems to me to carry a weight. Now, I know who I am. And I don't have to exclude my past. Yeah, I don't have to have a new name. I am Joseph. I am the brother who was sold. But God did that. Yeah. I've made my peace with it. I'm not in inner turmoil about it. In fact, I'm in inner acceptance. I'm in inner thankfulness. I'm in inner praise. I'm in an inner place where I glorify God for his wisdom and his ways. It reminds me, the New Testament person, Paul. I was shipwrecked, I was beaten, in danger amongst friends, in danger amongst foes, and so on. And then the next paragraph he says, the glorious kindness of our God and Savior, the all-surpassing greatness. He made peace with this stuff as well. He didn't live in the trauma. He got through to the other side, to a place of praise and thankfulness. So that when he writes his advice to people who are also experiencing trauma because they're being persecuted, people are being thrown into prison, people are being killed, people are being oppressed because of their faith in Jesus. And what writes the apostle? He says, rejoice. Again, I say to you, rejoice. What kind of advice is that for somebody who's just had their family member thrown into prison? Yeah. But I think he can say it because he's walked the journey. And he knows something that they don't perhaps all know yet. That God will come in his kindness and make you forget some things. He'll make you fruitful despite some things. At the end of Genesis, Jacob is prophesying over his sons. Chapter 49, verse 22. Joseph is a fruitful vine near a spring whose branches climb over a wall. With bitterness archers attacked him, they shot at him with hostility. But his bow remained steady, his strong arm stayed limber because of the hand of the mighty one of Jacob, because of the shepherd, the rock of Israel, because of your father's God who helps you, because of the Almighty who blesses you. With blessings of the skies above, blessings of the deep springs below, blessings of the breast and the womb, your father's blessings are greater than the blessings of the ancient mountains, than the bounty of the age-old hills. Let all these rest on the head of Joseph, on the brow of the prince among his brothers. Poetic. But the beauty of that, in everything that happened to Joseph, he did not lose his rootedness as a vine in the place where God had planted him. Somewhere in God's own land, atmosphere, purpose. He didn't lose the root. And as a vine has got this ability to just grow. Joseph grows. Grows over the wall. They shoot at him, doesn't matter. Grows, he produces fruit this side of the wall and that side of the wall. An amazing testimony. A truly blessed man. A man of great inner rest, I think, of identity, of peace with his life and his story. How did he achieve that? Well, there was external rest involved that he hadn't chosen for himself. There were sleepless nights involved, I'm sure. But most of all, he got there because of God's kindness. Because the shepherd of Israel, the rock, kept him. So that's as far as our method goes. Our method is God. And last story that you're well aware of is the story of the father who had two sons, and one son says, "Give me my inheritance," and he goes off and he squanders it all, and then one day he realizes, I've got no inner peace. I'm eating the food of pigs. I need to go home. This is not doing me any good. I need to find rest, externally and internally. And the only way I can find this is I'll go home to my father. But he will receive me, and I will find rest for my soul. And the father has just the right words for him. He comes guilt-ridden saying, "Father, forgive me," but the father has just the right words for him. Words that restore him and heal him and put him upright again. Nobody else could have had those words but the father. And then the older son comes and he's offended by seeing that. And it brings out his internal unrest. Saying, "Well, I've worked, I've slaved, you didn't give me even a goat." No, suddenly it's revealed what's bugging him on the inside. But the father has got the right words for him too. And I think that's our hope and that's our confidence. That God will have the right word for each one of us. The word that brings us peace. The word that gives us rest for our souls. Can we do something to help that? Yes, I think we can, insofar that we try not to make friends with the enemies of peace. Anger, accusation, self-righteousness, blame, and so on. Try not to be friends with them. That helps. And perhaps also Try and be friends with the friends of peace. Forgiveness, thankfulness, rejoicing, praise, evaluating things in the light of God. Try and be friends with those. That, I think that helps. And the Sabbath rest, I think it helps. But none of these can equal just the Father speaking his words, God showing his kindness, God making us forget and God making us fruitful. So let me turn this into a prayer for us. Heavenly Father, no one knows us like you do. No one knows us in the dark and in the light like you do. In the social context of being with others and in the moments of being alone, all by ourselves with our own thoughts. You know us. And so we pray today that yet again you will come to show us your kindness. Be with us. Help us to forget. Help us to be fruitful. Help us to remember the dreams. Help us to be so full and overflowing with peace that we can be ones who let our peace come upon others. The peace of God that passes all understanding will guard our hearts and our minds in Christ Jesus. Christ be with me. Christ within me. Christ behind me, Christ before me. Christ beside me, Christ to win me. Christ to comfort and restore me. Christ beneath me, Christ above me. Christ in quiet, Christ in danger. Christ in hearts of all that love me. Christ in mouth of friend or stranger.